Welcome. Good evening. I'm Gleaves Whitney, Executive Director of the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation. And even though the federal government isn't open, the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation most certainly is. And unlike Washington, we start on time. Our thanks to Aquinas College for their nimbleness in accommodating us on such short notice. We really appreciate being here in this lovely auditorium with you. And I want to thank all of you for your flexibility. You're used to coming to the Ford downtown where there's easy parking and all, but there's great parking here too, as we discovered out there. And it's a wonderful evening to have this event in this auditorium. You can sit back, I think, and enjoy a great program this evening, because rather than shutting anything down, we're about to open up an evening of insight and inspiration. At the Ford, we have been commemorating the 50th anniversary of the Ford presidency. And it's important to understand, of course, all the things that President Ford did in his presidency in Washington, D.C., but it's also important to understand what was going on outside of Washington, D.C. Outside, aren't we all getting that lesson today? And so what were some of the big things that were happening back in 1975? Well, as this audience knows, from the flyer, if from nothing else, one of the great mystery stories of 1975 was the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald in Lake Superior at just this time of year. With us to share the definitive story, a detective story, and to throw new light on what happened during the evening of November 10 is John U. Bacon, who hails from Ann Arbor. A fellow history major at the University of Michigan, John has committed his adult life to journalistic inquiry and also to the writing of books for the general public. And these books tell some of the essential stories of North American history, the history of the United States and Canada. Really interesting perspective to go across that border and get a broader perspective of our own country. These are the stories of our time, and he's now the author of some 14 books, and these books range from history to sports to business, 5 of which have landed on the New York Times bestseller list. Watch, I think The Gales of November is going to be the 6th book to land on the bestsellers list, and just in time for the holidays, by the way. Good timing, John. At this point in his career, I am really not bashful to say that I think John belongs in the canon of public historians who tell our American story with such imagination, such verve, and such fidelity to the facts that I think he belongs in the company of a group that includes Ken Burns, Eric Larson, Doris Kearns Goodwin, and many of the other people we've come to read to learn about ourselves. Now, in conversation with John is Jim Hackett. Jim Hackett serves on the Board of Trustees of the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation, and we are fortunate to have him here this evening because it was Jim who called me up one day, and he said, I think I've got a great idea for a program for the Ford. And of course, when Jim recommends something, we listen. And of course, it was to bring John U. Bacon. We'd never had the opportunity to host John before, and so I snapped up the opportunity right away with Jim's blessings. So you know Jim, I think, this audience knows Jim, from his many leadership positions. He was the head of Ford Motor Company. He was the head of Steelcase Foundation and the company. He was the head also of Michigan Athletics when they brought in, under his tutelage, a future national championship winning coach, Jim Harbaugh. So Jim has an eye for innovation, of knowing where a company and a society are going, and masterfully steering us toward that future. As I say, Jim serves on our board, and he serves on a number of committees, and that's where I've gotten to watch him and his mind at work. It's never boring. You're always at a pace. You're being stretched when you're with Jim, and that's what makes him so delightful. And that's going to be the skill that he's going to bring to us this evening in his conversation with John. So he tells me he's read The Gales of November already twice. I guess he consumed it first on tape and then went back and read it. And earlier today, I got to hear the questions he put to John U. Bacon, and it was a fascinating discussion that ensued. We're going to continue that discussion now. So ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming John U. Bacon and Jim Hackett.
Thank you, Gleaves. And as I said today, we are so fortunate to have Gleaves Whitney as head of the Presidential Foundation. I continually learn from him. An admission I'd like to make tonight is that with all the great things I've been able to do, one of the things I hate is public speaking. I don't like to take up airtime. And I'm in the company of somebody who's a scholar around the topics that we're going to talk about tonight. And I first meet him because he's authoring with Bo Schembechler, Bo's life, called Bo's Lasting Lessons. They come to Grand Rapids, Bo's having a gathering, and John looks today like he's 18 years old. Back then he looked like he was 10. And I was shocked by that because Bo just had such, not animosity, but let's just say he was tough on the press, John. Fair. And so John got full access. In fact, all of the papers that Bo had for his whole career, he pushed them across the table to ask John to commemorate his life. So that night I got to interact with John and saw this incredible humility, incredible ability to listen. But what you'll learn is the ability to weave together a story. When I read Bo's book, I got tears because I thought he captured the exact essence of the man that I loved. And later, when I'm not actually athletic director yet, but I'm involved with questions at Michigan. And John and I would meet because of that association with Bo. I would just ask his opinion. And you will see him often on CNN or ABC News, or because really the number one voice for the whole Big Ten is John Bacon. So when they want to ask a question about the history of the sport or the way it's evolving today, this is the man that gets the call. Often writing short form articles in the New York Times and Atlantic and things like that. But he gets the bug to move outside athletics. So today we heard from David Hooker and others who read his book, The Halifax Explosion. Is that it, John? Which is not our topic tonight, but I've actually ordered it because of all the people today that talked about it. And so this second book, which I think is for sure a bestseller, is so captivating, we're going to get right to it. Now, when I learned from John just in one of our casual moments that he's thinking about this book about the Edmund Fitzgerald, how many in the audience know who the Edmund Fitzgerald is named after? Now, if you've read the book, you know it. Okay, so see, it's a small number. I was one who knew it because I was on the board of Northwestern Mutual for 19 years. It was all in Milwaukee. And this is a company that I think is over 150 years old, at least today. They still have journals from early policies that were written by hand. They had a boardroom. We had 27 board members, and it was a classic wood-paneled boardroom, high ceilings, Corinthian style. And when you were in it, you just knew it was a fantastic company and long-lived. It was so many people in the room, though, that when you needed a break, I was running Steelcase at the time, and I had to step out. They'd have these break rooms for the directors, and they were well appointed. And sitting next to me was a model of this freighter, the Edmund Fitzgerald. I was there 19 years, so 5 years I'd be in that room looking at, I just marveled at how beautiful a model it was. And I had the guts one day to ask, what was that? I'm going to let him tell you the story of the connection. But one of the things I'm proud to say I did contribute is I got John hooked up with the archivist at Northwestern Mutual in terms of putting this book together. So with that, I'd like John to start by just giving you some reflections on this gentleman behind me, because John's grasp of how important Gerald Ford is to our city and was to Michigan is through the eyes of his relationship with Bo Schembechler and others. So, John, if you'd start there.
Sure. First of all, great thanks to Gleaves Whitney, to the Ford Foundation, but also to Jim. This is his idea. My respect and affection for this man is boundless. And when Jim calls me to do anything, I just say yes in advance, which is, I know, a poor negotiating position. That's not my job to negotiate. So, and Bo, Bo, trust me, loved Jim, and I know how deep that went. So anyway, so thank you, Jim, for that. I'm sure I'm going to remember this night for a long time. So I first meet, we'll get to President Ford here in a second. When I had a chance to interview him by phone years ago, I couldn't help, we were talking about Fielding Yost and Bo Schembechler and some other folks, but I couldn't help but ask him a question that was raised by a story with Jim Hackett and Bo Schembechler, and it goes like this. Monday through Friday during the season, 10 to 12, Bo and his staff go into the coach's room. They lock the door, literally, all right? And Lynn Cook and Mary Passing know that if his boss, athletic director Don Kenham, is to call, you are to take a message. If the president of the university calls, you are to take a message. And here's the beauty part. If the president of the United States, and he was very close, of course, to Gerald Ford, and of course Gerald Ford was a star in Michigan, if he calls, you are to take a message. That's what I said. So I looked up when he's telling me this. I said, you can't be serious. He goes, Bacon, it was not my job to talk to the leader of the free world. It was my job to beat Purdue. That is a focused individual. And when I interviewed President Ford about, again, other topics, but I couldn't help but kind of slip that one in near the end of our conversation. He was very gracious. And I was warned in advance that going to talk to him, he's going to ask you at some point, well, John, how's the team look this year? And you better be ready with an answer because he knew his stuff. But I slipped it in there. By the way, Bo told me that between 10 and 12 during game weeks that he would not even answer a phone call from the Oval Office. I said, can that possibly be true? And he not only said it was true, it's pretty clear that he's unhappy about it. So I think it was. He couldn't, I mean, he can get Gorbachev on the phone, no problem, Brezhnev and so on. However, if a demonstration team center from London, Ohio, Jim Hackett, could not sleep the night before because he's been on this team for 2.5 years. He's not missed a practice, not taking a game off. They moved him from linebacker, where he's not fast enough, to center, where he's not as big as the All-Americans they've got. And he's knocking himself out every day, not taking a practice off. He's asking himself, he's a good student, why am I here? Why don't I go to Indiana and start or just drop football and excel in the classroom? So he comes down, no appointment to see Bo. And that takes some, I got to tell you, Jim, that's more guts than I think I would have had. And Lynn Cook and Mary Passing had strict instructions that if a player comes down, all right, AD, President Ford, none of those guys get through. But if a player comes down with a personal issue, do not ask him what it is. If it's personal, they will not tell you. Don't ask him to come back tomorrow. They couldn't sleep last night. This is your one chance to help that guy out. It doesn't matter his position on the team, what string he is, and so on. You are to open that door without question, and I'll talk to that player as long as we need to talk. So that's what she did. And Bo came out and talked to Jim. And I got this from Jim, not from Bo. Without jungling the change in his pocket, without looking over your shoulder at the meeting going on without you, without checking his watch, locked in with Jim as Jim kind of spilled his guts about what he's doing. And Bo says, and this is a genius move, by the way, after Jim is, spilling his guts about his role in the team and is it worth it or not, Bo, after he's done talking, Bo waits about 5 or 10 seconds before talking, and that sounds like not much. Count off 10 seconds for a moment. That is an unbelievable show of respect. And I get choked up thinking about you and Bo in this moment. And then he finally says, Jim, thank you for coming down. If you hadn't come down and told me your problem, I would not have known your problem. I couldn't have had a chance to help you. I might lose you without even knowing why. So I thank you for doing that. Colin Powell, great line. The minute you quit listening to your players' problems is the minute you quit being their leader, because they're going to find somebody else, and now that guy is their leader. So it's an honor for Jim to come down to talk to Bo. Then he says, I know we moved you from linebacker to center without complaint. I know you've not missed a practice. I know you've not taken a single play off the entire time you've been out there as demonstration team center. And that's why the nose guard you go against every day, and he sees you more than the rest of the Big Ten combined. That guy is an all Big Ten nose guard, and we are number 1 in the country right now, undefeated, and that's what you do for us. So I can't tell you what to do, but don't think for a second we've not noticed what you're doing, what you mean to us, and how much you help us. And of course, I don't need to tell you that Jim did not quit the team that day. That's how it goes from there. But that is one of my favorite stories, and I've used it countless times with corporations, hospitals, school systems. That is how you lead. And you fast forward 20 years when he is the 39-year-old CEO of Steelcase Furniture, and he's taking Bo along on a trip in a golf cart around to the various factories and shops they have and so on. And wherever they go, the secretary says, hey, Jimmy, how you doing? Hey, Beth, how are you? And the guy in the line says the same thing. And the truck driver says the same thing. And they get back to Bo's office after this tour, and Bo shuts the door and says, Hackett, tell me the truth. All that name stuff, that's a bunch of bullshit, isn't it? You don't know their names.
It was a hot day when I did that, and we had 8,000 employees in the Grand Rapids campus, so we had a cart. And Bo, as you know, David Hooker and others will confirm this, he had congestive heart failure. And but he outlived whatever that lifespan was projected to be. So he's in this cart, we're driving by, he'd stop and talk to all the folks in the shop. And it's over 100-degree combined humidity heat. So I turned to a couple of the guys that were helping me, and I said, look, we got to get Coach some water. Maybe we ought to take a break. And he overheard me. And he goes, what's that? And they go, well, Hackett's worried that you need to take a break. He goes, Hackett will drop before I do. So we should move on to our topic at hand, but
we can't help this.
We can't help it, and my love for John really is rooted in that. So we've had a lot of time together. In fact, at lunch today, we were riffing so much, and we got to NIL and all these kind of problems that are going on in athletics. But thankfully, John's calling to this topic is important. But he has a reflection important in the story of what President Ford meant to this question. And if you share that, I think it's really powerful.
I'm sure you folks get to Traverse City, and you know the Northwestern Michigan College right there on the bay. Part of that is something called the Great Lakes Maritime Academy. How many of you have heard of that before? Hey, wow. Home crowd, baby. All right, I'll take that all day long. The creation of that was actually very unlikely. There were only 5 beforehand. They're in Maine, Massachusetts, New York, Texas, and California. And you might have noticed those are all oceans or the Gulf of Mexico. And this is the only one in the Great Lakes, obviously the only inland one. Because to get that to happen, all the stars have got to align. The previous superintendent, John Tanner, told me this. He said, to get that, you need a team of leaders to push for it, including your governor, a U.S. congressman, a U.S. senator, and not just any congressman or senator, the people with pull, plus the Coast Guard. If you're missing any one of those pieces, it's not going to work, and that's why there are only 5 maritime academies in the country opened before us and none since. This opened in 1969. Well, who are those people at that time? In the late 60s, Michigan's stars seem to have aligned. Governor William Milliken, of course, lives in Traverse City. You've got Senator Bob Griffin, also lives in Traverse City. The Coast Guard Commandant had grown up in Leelanau County. That helps. And then, of course, the NMC President, Lee Biederman, happened to have a buddy in Congress named Gerald Ford from Grand Rapids. Without Gerald Ford, he was an essential piece of this, the Great Lakes Maritime Academy does not exist. 2 of the 29 men on the ship that day were Great Lakes Maritime Academy cadets. And you'll find my sources, by the way, are frequently populated by these guys because they're so sharp. This is an internationally recognized source of excellence. That if you go to the Panama Canal, the guys who are taking your ship to that canal are Great Lakes Maritime Academy graduates. That's how powerful this school is, and that's Gerald Ford.
And we're going to get to, why the environment with the great leadership of President Ford kind of, spurs an institution like that by this first question. I told John that, I do books on tape first just because when I was running businesses, I had to listen at 1.5 the speed, to try and get through them. But I was so taken by the story, I went back and read it, and of course I wanted to see the pictures. You'll learn about Edmund Fitzgerald here in a moment. But I was struck by the physics and the science in it. I was really amazed not having that training in the Maritime Academy where he talks first about the wave structure. So by a show of hands, how many people have read the book already? Okay, good. So
Great. More importantly, how many have bought it? Just kidding. I'm very glad you're reading it. Thank you very much.
You're going to hear me praise it constantly. So one of the first things in the book is the structure of waves. So John, can you tell them a little bit about that? Because it's amazing what this ship has to encounter.
Sure. There are a lot of shocks for me in this book. I started about 3.5 years ago, and I was asking my wife. The Bo book took about a year and change. The hockey book, about Let Them Lead, about coaching high school hockey team leadership, took about a year and change. This took me 3.5, almost 4 years. And I asked my wife, why is this taking me so long? Because, oh, that's easy. You didn't know anything. And I thought I knew most of it. I've done stories in the Great Lakes for years. I've sailed, Port Huron to Mackinac, things like this. 95% of what's in that book I did not know 4 years ago. That's how much I had to learn, including one of the big mind-blowing things that I came across in my research is that for these experienced sailors, the Great Lakes Maritime Academy graduates who've done the Great Lakes and the Atlantic Ocean, they have told me consistently, and I had to hear it, Jim, about 10 times before I actually believed it, I was willing to print it, and that is that the Atlantic Ocean for Great Lakes, for commercial sailors, is not nearly as dangerous as the Great Lakes. And that was shocking to me, and as John Hayes, one of these graduates said, he did 23 years in the Great Lakes and 12 on the Atlantic Ocean. He said, it's not even close. And the salties, the guys in the ocean, who used to make fun of us, they get in the Great Lakes, and they shut up pretty damn fast and start looking for safe harbor once they see what these waves are like. Why is it more dangerous? One, salt, as simple as it is. Our waves in the Great Lakes are sharp and pointy, like a mountain range, and they're twice as close together as those on the Atlantic Ocean. Why? Salt. Salt takes those waves and blunts them, and it spreads them out. So on the Atlantic Ocean, your waves are 10 to 16 seconds apart. Here in the Great Lakes, they're 4 to 8 seconds apart. That is twice as fast. Why does that matter? Third problem is storms. That the storms you get in the ocean are often 500 or 1,000 miles away, and by the time the waves get to you, they're pretty smooth. In the Great Lakes, the people at the Academy tell me they're what's called locally occurring storms. I said, what does that mean? He goes, it's over your damn head. You're fishing this morning, and now you are quickly looking for safe harbor before lunch, and you know how these things can kick up so fast. So you put it all together, and what do you get? On the Great Lakes with these 700-foot-long oar carriers, you can have your bow stuck in one wave 30 feet high, and then 700 feet later, and that's, by the way, the same distance as the Renaissance Center is high. That's how big these ships are. All right, you've got your stern stuck in another wave 30 feet high behind you. In between, you have nothing supporting 26,000 tons of iron ore. 26,000 tons of iron ore is about the same weight as 4,200 adult elephants. There's enough iron ore on that ship to build 7,000 Ford motor cars, all right, which is where it goes oftentimes, right there in the Rouge, built for that. An amazing load. Well, what's going to happen? It's going to sag in the middle. And then you go over one of those waves, and it hogs, which is the opposite. Then it sags, and then it hogs. It will do that 10,000 times a day during a storm, because that's how many waves you're going to see. You bend a paperclip back and forth 10,000 times, what's it going to do? Right? And these things have been around for 18, 30, 80 years. These ships last a long time. It takes a toll. So that is one of the problems this ship faced that night, based on the unique characteristics of the Great Lakes, which, again, I had no idea about before I wrote the book.
And John, explain what happens when you have a distribution of that many waves. There's a probability that something bigger is coming, right?
A certainty,
Yeah.
in fact, a mathematical certainty. By the way, I was saying this morning, or this afternoon at our lunch, I've done about 30 events. I've done about 60 or 70 interviews. Every question Jim asked me today, I had not heard before. So I got the eye black on, people. I'm stretched out. I worked out in my hotel room in between. So that's the kind of thing a CEO who's used to analyzing systems thinks about. Something called the Rayleigh distribution, which I also knew nothing about. If you're seeing, it's called the, if you're seeing 30-foot waves on a regular basis, 1/3 of them are 30-foot waves, that's what your brain registers. We know from mathematical models now that if you're seeing 30-foot waves on a regular basis, and that's what they're seeing that night, you will get about 10 to 15 40-foot waves. you will get 4 or 5 50-foot waves, and you will get, again, mathematical certainty, 1 or 2 60-foot waves coming after your ship somewhere in that evening. Now think about this. This ship only has 11 feet of what's called freeboard. That's between the water and your deck. And that's on a good day, and this is not a good day. So I guarantee you got less than that. And then you got a 30-foot wave, 40-foot wave, up to a 60-foot wave hitting your ship. I mean, I did not say this morning. The weight of those is about the same as 2 steam engines, by the way, train engines. That's hitting your deck every 4 to 8 seconds. That's what these ships take. And really, when I think about all the things that went wrong that night, I'm amazed it got as far as it did.
And it's incredible when you then lean into the way it was constructed. But before we talk about the way it was put together, let's talk about the Northwest Mutual connection and why they were interested.
So the question, who was Edmund Fitzgerald? And yes, he was a person. People have asked me, was there anybody called that? Like, they didn't make it up. So definitely a guy. He happened to be the CEO of Northwestern Mutual Insurance, which is now a $31 billion corporation based in Milwaukee, as it was pre-Civil War. Edmund Fitzgerald, you think, why is the CEO getting involved in Great Lakes shipping? Well, because his grandfather was a Great Lakes captain. 5 of his great uncles were all Great Lakes captains. 6 men in one family. That's like 3% of the total, I'm not kidding you, of all Great Lakes captains at that time. So this is an incredible shipping family. It's got to be a record. His father was a great builder of ships in Milwaukee, one of the best. So he was to the manor born, basically. He had a real affinity for this. He had 2 edicts when he decided to drop the money, $84 million, to build this ship in 1958. One, that it'd be the greatest ship the Great Lakes have ever seen. And it was on day 1, and everyone knew it. When they launched that ship in Detroit on June 23rd, 1958, 15,000 people came out to see it. That's more than the Tigers drew that year, by the way. So, now granted, it's an average Tigers team, but nonetheless, this was a big deal at the time. The Free Press gushed about it. This is the greatest thing ever put in Great Lakes water. It was the longest. It was one of the fastest. It set all the records on the Great Lakes. It was a show horse. It was a speedster. It was a heavyweight. It did it all, basically. So it was all that. And the second edict was that you not name the ship after me. So it was apparently a lovely man who was really respected by those at the company. So the board members figured out a way to get him out of the boardroom for about 5 minutes, do a quick vote. We're going to name it after him. All right, and it was, in fact, named after him. And his son, Edmund Bacon Fitzgerald, who's not a relation of mine to my knowledge, but he's the guy who brought the Milwaukee Brewers to Milwaukee. So he's a powerful guy in Milwaukee and also very well liked. He said the best day of my dad's life was June 28th, 1958, when that ship was launched, and the worst day was November 10th, 1975, because he felt that the rest of his life. He knew there were men on that ship, of course, and their lives are not going to be the same.
So it's common for insurance companies because they invest the surplus for insurance where they get really long-lived returns, you know. So this was a ship that was going to be, as John said, on the water for a very long time, paying rent and so on and so forth. Except we learned today from one of an expert, Matt, who has experience in what's called it's a backgrounding kind of insurance, reinsurance, that the ship was actually sold by Northwestern Mutual to Ogilvy and somebody.
Ogilvy Norton.
And yeah, but moving on, the ship gets built, and when you read the book, John goes into great detail about the appointments of it, and I didn't know that people actually book rides on that. Maybe that still happens today, and so the appointments were first class, and but I think what would be helpful for you to hear is they have to decide how to build it. And quick insight, when the mileage challenges for pickup trucks is front and center, like the F-150 would get 13 miles a gallon, we had to figure out a way to double that. And so this is in recent times, we make the cage that the vehicle is built around out of aluminum now. It was made out of steel. And the reason it took so long to do this, and the patents that are around it, is to rivet those panels to the aluminum. That's the way an airplane's built. But John will explain to you riveting and welding and shipbuilding and this challenge with the wave. So John, if you'd have at it and explain that, I thought that was fascinating.
Sure. It was built, like I said, in '58. It was the state of the art in almost every way possible. J.L. Hudson's, the old department store, appointed the living quarters, by the way, with carpeting, wood paneling, air conditioning, TVs. Hotels did not have these things in 1958 necessarily, so it really was that great. But they did a few things that most did not. One, it was modular construction. So it was built in 3 sections elsewhere and shipped to Detroit, where these 3 sections were fastened. And it was also built, they swapped out thousands of rivets for welds. Why would you do that? Because welds are cheaper, faster, and lighter. And that's what they really wanted, is the lightness. 1.2 million pounds lighter than rivets. What does that mean? That means you're not going to just save that weight. You're going to use that weight to load on, of course, more iron ore. 1.2 million pounds extra per every run. These ships make 50 runs a year, from Duluth, basically, to Toledo and back. 50 times 1.2 million adds up. These things are supposed to last 80 or 90 years. So that's a great resource, obviously, for the shipbuilders. But it comes with a catch. And I know you've studied this stuff more than I have. Rivets are stronger than welds. And it's especially true, of course, and as John Tanner, one of my experts, says, that never matters unless you're in a storm. And then it might matter a lot. So that's one of the things we see when it's on the lake, that it bends more than other ships bend. And that could be a problem also.
So the fascination around this wave structure and the way it's built takes so much of attention, and John does a great job of teeing that up. But of course, the story is about the inhabitants, you know, and all the people that made their lives on living on the lakes. And we didn't talk about this today, but in the cover of the book is a picture of the Great Lakes. John, can you just do a quick overview, like you do in the book, of how fortunate that resource is, because it's incredible.
Again, more things. Shipping is an invisible industry, I've come to believe. We depend on it far more than you ever realize, and we know almost nothing about it. And how much do we depend on it? Well, the cement in your basement, the car in your driveway, and the food on your table, I guarantee you, especially here in Grand Rapids, all comes from Great Lakes ships. And you know what? Around the world, the same story is true. This area produces more grain than any other in the world, more than the nation of Germany, and they're number 2 on this list. So this area is feeding the world, basically. So it's all from ships. Why do we not know anything about this? Because there are only about 30 guys per ship that do this work. Even in the heyday in 75, there were only 300 ships on the Great Lakes, big freighters. That's only 9,000 people spread out over 8 Great Lakes states, so there's no enclave of these sailors. On top of that, even if you live next to one, you ain't going to meet him because he's on a ship, okay? These guys are on ships 9 months out of the year in those days, as Heidi knows, of course, her dad was one of them. So in those days, no breaks, no anniversaries, graduations, birthdays, weddings, any of this stuff. So they're on the ship for 9 months out of the year. One of my experts in Traverse City, John Hayes, said, I'm a good dad. I'm very close to my 3 children. I did not teach any of them how to ride a bike. And that's what these families, not just the people on the ships, have to sacrifice to do this work. Why? The old gangster, of course, when he's asked, why do you rob banks? He said, because that's where the money is. All right? Well, iron ore, copper, limestone you need to convert iron to steel. It's what they do at U.S. Steel in Gary, Indiana. It's all from the north. It's all from these Great Lakes, which have to slip down through the Soo Locks to Gary, Detroit, Toledo, and so on. And I learned in the process that shipping is 3 times more efficient than trains and 6 times more efficient than trucks. We're not talking 6% or 60%. This is a 600% different. I mean, you're at Ford. What do you kill for 2%?
Oh my God. Yeah.
I mean, 600%?
Well, there's no way we'd have the car industry and leadership in the world without the Great Lakes delivering those materials.
That's a great perspective from a guy who knows a bit about this.
Yeah.
You must know Jim's background, CEO of Steelcase, CEO of Ford Motor Company, AD at Michigan is what I cared about most. But anyway, David Cole, Michigan expert, whose dad was the CEO of General Motors. He's got a great page in the book saying we have more natural resources than anybody. From 1945 to 1975, this area was Silicon Valley before Silicon Valley. And here's a little fun trick you can play, but not with these people in the room next, they're all going to know it. But at the bar afterwards or a cafe, whatever else, what Great Lakes City in 1960 was bigger than Miami, Jacksonville, Tampa, Nashville, Tennessee, and San Jose, California? These are all major league cities today. What Great Lakes City was bigger than that? Toledo. Toledo, Ohio was bigger than all 5 of those. That's how thriving this place was with economic power. So shipping was, without shipping, none of that happens. So shipping was the key.
So, my Kathy, 50 years that we've been married, her father worked in General Motors factory, and made a good wage as a UAW worker. I've lost a little track in the last 5 years since the last contract, but I remember a UAW worker is probably earning north of $105,000 today. In the book, John expresses that in 9 months, you earn close to $150,000 being one of the members on the ship. So that explains, John, a little bit of how do you get motivated to want to go away for that time? But it's not all of it, right? I mean, you could talk a little bit about the pull and take of what it was like to be a member of one of those ships.
Well, sure. It's important to remember these guys were born in the 19-teens, 1920s, 1930s. There's kind of 2 groups. 3/4 were in their 50s and 60s, and 1/4 was 20 to 22. So a big division there. These guys had fought in World War II. They'd survived the Great Depression. They'd fought in Korea, often with great distinction. So they're not likely to complain about what they're doing, especially at that kind of money. For a deckhand, the lowest ranking guy on the ship, that guy can make $170,000 to $180,000 a year in today's dollars, 3 or 4 times, even back then, what a teacher could make. And of course, these guys had fancier jobs than that along the way. So you're not in a mine, you're not in a factory, you're not in a farm. If this appeals to you, it's a pretty good lifestyle in many ways, and they eat like kings. And I got on 2 of these ships, the Anderson and the Sykes, for 5 days, and I gained 5 pounds both times. They still eat like kings. So that also, it's in some ways a very cool lifestyle, but you do sacrifice a lot of family time, and that's not easy. So these guys have hard lives, but as one of my friends said, who's been on the ships all these years, I got to see the Northern Lights almost every week. When I'm going through Lake Superior, I saw fall colors you've never seen. I'm surrounded by guys I by and large like, and I eat like a king. Is it perfect? No, it's not, but I never quit.
So as they took off on a trip,
Yes.
how many days were they not on the ship and not in port, and then they got to stop in port? Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Those ships, when they fit out, as they say, in March and come back usually in January, but not always, that ship, every single minute of every single day, is loading, traveling, or unloading. And they don't care what time of day or night they get in. All right, they start immediately. All right, so this trip, these ships are in constant motion 9 months out of the year. So for the sailors, that means your family pictures. One guy I know would take the family pictures and put them down when the season started, and only put them back up with 2 weeks to go, because otherwise it'd break his heart. It's too much. But in the meantime, you do end up in Silver Bay, Minnesota, Duluth, Minnesota. You end up in Toledo, Ohio, places like this. And whenever they land, of course, you have, when you're loading, it's about 4 or 5 hours. When you're unloading, it's about 14 hours. So what do? You don't have a car. There's no Uber back then, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You go what's called up the street. Not up the road, up the street. And their bars always had 3 things in common. One, they served Stroh's Bohemian-style beer. That proved to be very popular. They had a great jukebox with some of the best music ever recorded. Motown, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, you name it, of course. And it was within walking distance of the dock. Otherwise, they can't do it. So I've been to many of these bars, Jim, all part of hard-hitting investigative journalism. I know you're impressed by my dedication, Jim. So.
And you had an emphatic look in your eyes when you mentioned Stroh's, because I got near that in Ann Arbor when I was.
Yes, I was familiar with that from a young age.
Yeah,
I'll just leave it at that. But these guys, that was your one break, basically, to get a few beers up there. Every bar on the Great Lakes would cash your checks. These checks could be hundreds or even thousands of dollars. And I said, I said when they got paid, I said, how'd you guys get any money to go to the bars? And they just laughed. Because they said, trust me, every bar on the Great Lakes would be more than happy to cash your check. All right? Why? Because they know that Ford Motor Company is not going out of business. They had their own ships. Those checks are very good. And guess what? If I give you $500 cash, you're going to leave about $100 here. So that proved to be a very smart decision for the bars. So that part I thought was obvious. You need some humor in a book like this. You better grab it where you can, because the last half is just not funny.
And so when they were in the travel, we can come back. Well, let's do this, because it was kind of important. You know there's a famous song that's associated with that, and you may want to get to that later. But But there was a song on the jukebox that I learned from your book that I remember that song. I had no idea of its association to the topic.
Very much so. So obviously, when I'm writing the book, people don't realize this, that I pay for the maps, I pay for the photos, and I pay for the music. So how many songs do you want to buy the rights to? Of course, it's not cheap. So there's no question I clearly had to buy the rights to Edmund Fitzgerald. It's the title of the book, all that. So I used it. They gave me a very good deal because the band liked me, and they were kind on that front. But then there's a second song, as Jim says, called Brandy, You're a Fine Girl. And if you haven't heard it, go home and listen to it tonight. Mr. Williams, I know, my good friend, hotshot Vice President at Meyer, I'm embarrassed in front of the whole crowd. One of the Michigan football player, by the way.
Oh, a fine player, unlike the bench warmer here. So.
but equally fine men.
Yeah,
how's that?
Yeah, he is.
But no, that guy was an NFL draft pick. But anyway, Brandy, you're a fine girl. Play when you get back. So do I pay for this or not? And the decision was made when I was at the President's Lounge in Superior, Wisconsin. I don't know why they called that. I assure you, Jim, no president has ever visited the President's Lounge. I guess they're waiting for that to happen. The Silver Bay Municipal Bar in Silver Bay, Minnesota. The city owns it. That is their main source of income for the city, and they picked correctly. And you keep on going like this. Every single bar at all these stops has got, to this day, has got Brandy, You're a Fine Girl on it. So I tracked down Elliot Lurie, the lead singer and the writer of that song. He told me the whole story behind it. He's going to Rutgers University. He's in fraternity and so on. He pens this song, and he thinks it's not bad. They have no idea it's going to be the #1 song of 1972. And I said, everyone, this is their anthem. And I mentioned the old guys and the young guys, the old guard and the young Turks. They didn't get along. They didn't agree on a lot of stuff. I mean, these guys are World War II veterans. These guys are trying to avoid Vietnam. If the old guys get to the bar first, you're getting Charlie Pride and Johnny Cash and so on, the country music. If the young guys get there first, you're getting the Rolling Stones and the Motown and so on. But they would all play Brandy, You're a Fine Girl. When it came on, the bar stops, and everyone sings literally in unison for that 3.5 minutes, Jim. They're all getting along. And all these guys said, man, that guy must be a great sailor because he gets it. He understands what it's like. My life, my love, and my lady is the sea. Yes, that's us. And I interviewed Elliot Lurie, and he said, the only ship I've ever been on was the Staten Island Ferry. Hate to burst the bubble. I said, well, then you're one hell of an artist. Because all the sailors are buying it.
Yeah, and I love that song, and now I got an even better connection. But one thing, John, when they left the bar and they had to get back on, do we call it a ship or a boat?
On the ocean sailors, if you call it a boat, they'll chastise you. The Great Lakes guys are cool, and a ship or boat, they don't care.
They don't care. So when they got on it,
but I'll tell you this: if you say up the road and not up the street, they get mad.
Because how easy was it for them to be on top of the ship, and for what reason? Because you explained these things they have to close and clamp.
Hatches.
The hatches. And then how do they get from front to back, stem to stern?
Sure. This ship has got 21 gigantic hatches, and these weigh many tons. You need a crane, a deck crane it's called, to lift these things off and put them off to the side, to either load or unload. You got 21 of those. That's quite a process. When they leave port, if it's nice out in June, July, it usually is, they will clamp the corners of each hatch. That's enough to secure it. These clamps are they're called Kessner clamps. They're basically gigantic sea clamps, more or less. But they're 80 plus per hatch, 21 hatches. So these guys have got a latch, about 1,600 or so of these things before they leave on a rough night. In November is always rough. So they always do that. That takes about half an hour to an hour. It is so rigorous for these three guys to do it. They do it in about an hour. That in the winter, when it's snowing sideways, they end up in T-shirts. They're sweating so much doing this work. So it's hard work. And that's one of the questions, of course, on November 10th. And then you also mentioned the tunnel. So a safety feature on the ship, and now others have it as well. You can't walk across that deck when it's going like this, or the rain's coming, or the ice is coming. You only have 3 wires keeping you on deck, basically, so it's unsafe. So you take what's called the tunnel. The tunnel is this hallway, not much bigger than a human being, not much higher or wider, and it is right below the deck and right next to the hull. It's kind of squeezed in there on both sides. And I've taken these tunnels, and if you're claustrophobic, do not take one of these tunnels. If you're claustrophobic, don't get on a Great Lakes ship, by the way. For that matter, this is often close quarters. And these things run 700 feet, the length of the ship. So because of all the decisions they made on the ship, and the government regulations changed in 69, 71, and 73. And when the ship was built, it was allowed 14 feet above water. All right, so that's called freeboard again, 14 feet. But then the regulations changed and eventually got knocked down to 11 feet. That is a colossal difference. All right, thousands of tons literally are the difference right there. So now you're 11 feet in the water instead of 14 or 11 feet above. They're 14 feet. It was not built for that. It was built for 14 feet. It is not the engineer's fault. But when you're on it, as a result, it flexes more than most ships. In 1972, Craig Sullivan, another Great Lakes Maritime Academy graduate, was walking from the pilot house to the galley, 700 feet back there, to go eat every day, every meal. They're going through Port Huron. It's about 5 or 10 foot waves, and that's nothing for these guys. Nonetheless, when you're in this tunnel, already claustrophobic, and it starts to go up and down these waves, that ship bends so much that you could not see the lights for a few seconds, and the lights come back, and the lights disappear, and the lights come back. This is 729 feet of steel, for crying out loud, and that's how much it flexed. Other guys told me it would also flex side to side. And one of the guys, the porters, in 63 said, that didn't seem right to me, but everyone else told me it's normal, so I believed it. But afterwards, I wondered if that's right.
So this beast of something that's man-made is itself an actor or a player in this story. But we're going to move on to talk about the captain of this ship, who, given our talk about Bo Schembechler and this great leader behind us, talk about Captain McSorley.
I think it would have fit in with those two, actually, and probably more President Ford, a quieter version of Bo than Bo was. I don't think Bo could be called quiet on a given day. Bo spoke in capital letters, by the way, constantly. So
bold capital.
Bold capitals, italicized, exclamation points.
Yeah.
There you go. Captain McSorley was a captain at age 31, the youngest captain on the Great Lakes, and he was 63 years old when this ship leaves that night. That is more than half your life as a Great Lakes captain. That very rarely happens. And the guys I talked to consistently said that man was the greatest captain on the Great Lakes. And even his rivals would say this. That's how good he was. So he's the best in rough weather. He was the most aggressive. He never turned around. He never laid anchor, which the company's like. He always got there, of course. He was also the best pilot, the best steering pilot in the Great Lakes. One guy told me a story about him. He said, I saw this man park 729 feet of steel between two other gigantic ore carriers at a half-mile-long dock in Two Harbors, Minnesota, with 5 feet on either side, and that man did not touch a damn thing. He said, parallel parked as though he's parallel parking his F-150 pickup truck in a parking lot. That's how good this guy was. And he was beloved, and that was very rare back then because these guys tend to be tyrants, the way coaches often were back in the day, teachers and coaches and so on and bosses. They would throw hot coffee at their people and all kinds of crazy stuff. This guy was so beloved and relatively quiet that his crew would follow him from ship to ship to ship as he was promoted. He had some guys in that pilot house he knew for 20 years. That's how good this guy was. And heartbreakingly to me, he was trying to decide to come back for one more season or not. And he finally decides we're all going to come back, all 5 of us as old buddies, for one more season. And the last trip was supposed to be the week before. That was supposed to be the last trip. I got that in my book. That's new news from Doug Frericks, whose dad had the conversation with McSorley in Silver Bay. And he said, you're going to be done next week, right? No, we're going for one trip after that. He's a captain. Captains get bonuses once they exceed their quota for cargo. And he was about to exceed his quota. And he needed that money to pay for his wife's medical care because Nellie, his wife in Toledo, was in 24-hour care, I think probably for cancer, but I can't quite nail that down. So this trip was not for greed or ego. This trip was to pay for his wife's medical care. Yeah. And that was going to be his last trip.
So when you read the book, it's so captivating, but this part that tells the story of that night, it's one of those things where you go, don't bother me because I got to finish this. It's a page turner. And so I want you to read the book for that effect, but one of the things I asked John to explain today, and I think you should, they're trying to make this course, that's why you need the map if you haven't sailed the Great Lakes, to understand the route that he has to take in order to get the cargo to places like the River Rouge. And so a couple of things, John, if you would, explain that route. You can go ahead and talk about north and south, but also why they're hustling versus other ships at the same moment. which is in the back of his mind in the middle of this emergent storm. So,
Yes, we have great maps. We got David McCullough's map maker, who's retired in the UK. Man, I talked him out of retirement. So he did a great job on these. Your earlier question, they would leave Duluth or Two Harbors, one of these head of the lakes ports at the western end of Lake Superior. Take about 2.5, 3 days to get to either Zog Island, Detroit, right by the Rouge plant, or Toledo, occasionally Cleveland, but usually one of those. And this is a very consistent ship. Other ships go all over the place and carry all kinds of stuff. This ship was called the Toledo Express, and they almost always exclusively carried taconite, the iron ore, basically. So that was the usual route. And you had another question about a good point.
yeah, which is these on a deadline.
Oh,
and
competitiveness, yes.
And competitiveness and speed matters kind of
Thank
thing.
you. Speed does matter, and Jim does not forget it, everything, even though I do. Here's the deal. If you're trying to get to Parisian Island, which is the checkpoint at the northern part of the Soo Locks. The Soo Locks are the bottleneck for this whole story. And without the Soo Locks, these ships look very different. These ships are amazingly long. 729 feet is the Fitzgerald. That's 1 foot short of the tallest of the Renaissance Center buildings. That's how long the ship is. That's your walk, by the way, to lunch. So there's that, but they're only 75 feet wide. That is less than the distance between home plate and first base. Why are they so long, and why are they so wide? And I knew this morning when I talked to Jim, by the way, he gave me a lot of great lines that I wish I'd gotten in the damn book. And one of them is they're about the same shape as a pencil. It's about right, and that's a really good analogy. I'm using that next time.
You have it.
So these things are incredibly long, incredibly thin. No ships elsewhere in the world are designed like this. Why are they designed like this? For maximum load, to squeeze it through the Soo Locks. That's your bottleneck. So these guys, the Soo Locks is the bottleneck. What do you have to do? You have to get there first. Why? Because if I beat Jim's ship, if he's a competitive captain and I am too, and we're going along like this, if I get to Parisian Island before he does, or Detour Michigan going the other way, going north, upbound, if I beat Jim by 10 seconds, I beat Jim by an hour. Because my ship goes first, you got to wait. I'm going through the Soo Locks. It's a 1 hour process. Once I get out of there, I got a 1 hour lead on you now. Guess what? I'm getting to River Rouge before you. If I'm getting to River Rouge before you, it's a 14-hour unloading process. With 30 seconds, I beat Jim by 15 hours. And trust me when I tell you, Ford Motor Company knew about that, and so does Ogilvy Norton and U.S. Steel and so on. And that's part of your pay plan and so on. So these captains, it's built, they're wired to be highly competitive on these lakes.
And so picture that mindset, a man who cares about his crew. He knows it's his last trip, and randomly the weather changes, John.
The Perfect Storm is titled, that title's already taken. Sebastian Younger did a great job on that one, of course. This was a perfect storm. 3 things happened at once, and it's, by the way, still the storm of the century. So go back 100 years, this still takes it. But anyway, what happens? 3 things. 1, the longer winter takes to arrive, the nastier it shows up. I didn't appreciate that fact, but it's like water behind a dam. And the longer you wait to get it, the worse it's going to be. And in this case, of course, it's on Sunday, November 9th, in Duluth, Minnesota. It is 70 degrees. They're wearing T-shirts. That is not normal. So that's one problem. Second problem is the Alberta Clipper. This very common storm comes in from Western Canada. It's going to go straight across Lake Superior and kick up the waves there. They knew about that one. They knew a fair amount. They did not know about another storm, which they should have known about. Better forecasting, better communication. Started in California, goes across Oklahoma, heads on up with hot, wet air. It's all going to collide right in front of Whitefish Bay. That's the other end of Lake Superior. Whitefish Bay is where you're trying to get for safety. That's where the Soo Locks are, 350 miles away. It sets up like a catcher in front of home plate. So knowing this, knowing part of this at least, McSorley, who's normally a very aggressive captain, he does something that's very uncharacteristic. And he takes what's called the northern route. Instead of going straight across the bottom of Lake Superior, as close as you can get, he takes the northern route, which is 3 sides of a square, basically. It means you're hugging, more or less, the shore of Lake Superior on the Canadian side. Why do that? Because now the winds are protected from Isle Royale, from the shore, and so on. It's a much better ride for 2/3 of that trip. But it comes with 3 catches. 1, pay me now or pay me later. By taking the first 2 legs, it's going to be a much calmer storm than it is. But the last leg, you got to pay the price. All right, now you got 350 feet of 350 miles of fetch. That means you're going to get 30-foot waves, and now they're hitting your ship broadside against the side. They do not like that. Now you're rocking back and forth like this. That ain't good. Second thing is it takes 14 more hours to go this way than to go this way. That means you unwittingly, unknowingly, in his defense, you just let that storm from the southwest get a 14-hour head start to get to Whitefish Bay before you. I'm convinced if he had just gone straight across, he would have made it. Would have been rough, would have been nasty, but I think they would have made it. Go ahead.
No, please. Well, we've got a few minutes to finish, and then we're going to ask questions. But John, because I want you to hear this. That evening, you heard what he's managing normally, and then he's got the bad weather. Talk a little bit about this material that's inside those big storage, cavernous storage, and what might have happened.
Well, there you go. The third problem is he does not know this route nearly as well. He takes the southern route 50 times a year, and really 100 if you count round trips. He's been taking that thousands of times his entire career. He knows that like the back of his hand. He takes this route every few years. He does not know it nearly as well. On the way down, what happens? Whatever can go wrong, goes wrong. His long radar gets knocked out by the storm. His short radar gets knocked out by the storm. The lighthouse at Whitefish Bay, the one that everyone is dying to see, it's everyone's favorite lighthouse. The light goes out, the radio beacon goes out. You are now truly sailing blind. What does that mean? He does not know where Caribou Island is. Caribou Island is this little nasty 1 by 3 mile island. All it is swamps and flies. The caribou left a long time ago. Okay, there's a horrible little spit of land they probably swam across Canada. And in front of that is 6 fathoms shoal. A fathom is 6 feet. 6 fathoms shoal, therefore, is 36 feet, but it's false advertising. In some places, it's only 11 feet deep. This ship draws 29 feet on a good day, and this is not a good day. You should be nowhere near this. But if you don't know where you are, and it's already black and 30-foot waves, and you got a snowstorm going in front of your you might not know where you are, and your maps, you might have turned the map too soon, like the old AAA triptych. If you turn the map too soon, you lose the island. Now you're in trouble. And there's a decent theory, and we got some proof of that in the book, but it's hard to prove anything conclusively, that it probably hit at 6 fathom shoal. If it did, that's when it starts taking on water. This is back to Jim's point. If it takes on water, taconite, these little pebbles that are great. You know how fracking reinvigorated drilling in the United States, of course. When the easy stuff was gone, fracking got the hard stuff. Well, when the easy iron ore was gone, right around World War II, taconite takes the former waste material and turns it into very valuable iron and steel. So that's what you got in the ship, these little pebbles. Great, except these things absorb 4 to 7% of their weight in water. You think that's not a big deal. What is 4 to 7% of 26,000 tons? All right, now you're adding too big a load on what is already too big a load, and worse than that, the water also hides between these taconite pebbles as like milk between your Cocoa Puffs and so on at home. All right, that's what it does. That adds thousands and thousands of tons. So a ship not designed for this in the first place, with welds instead of rivets, right now it's taking on water, it's being absorbed by the taconite on the ship. I'm amazed the ship got as far as it did, given how many things they're facing. That's how good a captain he was. Now you've got a list to the right, a starboard list. You're fighting the waves now. You can't steer very well with the starboard list. It gets worse and worse as they go on. And now you're more vulnerable to what? Capsizing and or a big old wave coming down to pin you down. You're like a 3-legged animal in the wild, and that's how he sails for 4 or 5 hours before finally the last communication.
So I'm going to ask for questions, and then some grace from you all when we're ready to end. I want John to tell you the story of the 17-year-old girl who's waiting on her boyfriend as we close in the tattoo. So let's take questions from the audience. And would you like to use the microphone?
Got 2 out there. You and I will share, Jim. And by the way, I'm not here tomorrow, so ask your question now.
Hi. Hi, John. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you again, by the way. The lovely Ms. Williams, everybody.
Yeah, not that deep. Okay, so how do we know what they were carrying on the ship, and who, unless it's going to spoil it for me, because I'm going to read the book, who paid for them to take this journey? Okay, and one more question. Was there insurance?
There we go. I'm sure there was insurance, no doubt about that. They took taconite. That's what they always took. That's what they always took. And I actually found 2 of the guys in Superior, Wisconsin. I found them where? At the President's Lounge. Again, hard-hitting investigative journalism. I found 2 guys who actually loaded the ship the day before. Friends of mine found them 3 months earlier, so I called them up and met them at the President's Lounge, and they were part of the guys who put the taconite on, 26,000 tons. So we know it's taconite. They're being paid by Ogilvy Norton as the company that operates that. They're going to go to Zug Island, I believe, for National Steel. National Steel, of course, is one of the biggest steel companies in the world, and they're going to turn that into cars, naturally. So that's who's paying them. Insurance, I know less about that, admittedly, but I believe that, and this is the reinsurance problem. Here's the expert.
Yeah, so we learned today that the investment thesis changes if you have to sell some of the risk, and this seemed like a sure bet. So I don't know what Northwestern Mutual did relative to insurance if they sold their interest in it. So, but we know now from one of the gentlemen at lunch today that they're regularly insured. But the people that were killed on that, John, you can tell what you found out, what they got or didn't get.
Yes, I've talked to, I think, 14 of the 29 families, and they've been very gracious, and I'll mention that again later on in this talk. The company, said to say, Northwestern Mutual, who owned the ship originally, had nothing to do with the operation of the ship whatsoever, even from day one. So Ogilvy Norton takes over the operation, and I believe we learned today they might have owned it at the end, which, again, you find out things after the fact. Ogilvy Norton that night did not call any of the families, which I can't spin that. So the families find out how. They found out from Dennis Anderson on Channel 10 in Duluth, on WTOL, Channel 11 in Toledo. Ruth Hudson, the mother of Bruce Hudson, her only child, a deckhand, she finds out Tuesday morning the next day while she's driving to the Bonnie Bell cosmetic factory where she works on the radio. She finds out that her son's, her only child's ship is gone. I mean, what is that like? And my friend Heidi Wilhelm Bravon, who's here tonight, she's a 12-year-old girl in Mauquois, Wisconsin. When this happens, her neighbors see, I believe, Dennis Anderson out of Duluth, and at 10 o'clock at night or so, gets a knock on the door from the neighbors saying that your dad's ship is gone. And then, of course, her mom spends the night on a phone trying to get a hold of anybody in Cleveland to find out what's going on, and no callbacks, no answers, nothing. And again, I'm not trying to demonize anybody, but you can't spin that. So what you got from the company is whatever you managed to get from the company. It was not a settlement, it's not a class action lawsuit, it's whatever lawyer you might have gotten, or you didn't get a lawyer. What they tended to get was about a year's salary. And I'm going to jump ahead a little bit on that one. I talked to Heidi Bravon about this. She's here tonight. Heidi, you want to say hello briefly? She's one of the wonderful people who trusted me with her story over 3 years, and I called Heidi like all of them like 10 or 15 times. Sorry about that, Heidi. I had to get it right, but she is the youngest of 7 children. All right, that is your breadwinner. Her mom is obviously a full-time mom, as you have to be, with 7 kids, naturally, and now you have a year's pay. And what do you do? All right, these people are tough. These people are strong. They're not complainers. They're not whiners. And they ended up, going to state schools. They ended up going to the Air Force. In Heidi's case, they ended up raising families, or some kind of combination of the 3. And maybe I should save this for the end, but I can't help it. So in talking to these people, and I'll probably get choked up telling this section, they stay at the cruise quarters at Whitefish Point. If you've ever been up there, it's one of the beautiful old houses, basically. They stay there, and they got this wonderful butcher block kitchen table. That's where I'll end up hanging out afterwards. And we're, drinking some stuff and telling stories and whatnot. And Heidi says, what happened is this. The crew was very close, unusually close. And I talked to guys who were on the crew that summer, and they said this crew was elite. This crew was the best at each position. Like a football team, you had the best in the business at each position. There were about 13 different jobs out of 29. I said, and on this ship you had no weirdos, and this was the 70s. He made that point. So he said, this is a very close crew. But the families didn't know each other, I don't think, at all. They're in the Duluth area, about a third Toledo, a third Cleveland, more or less. They don't know each other's names. They don't have addresses, phone numbers, anything. But then this 20-year process afterwards to get the bell raised is quite a mission. That takes a lot of effort, of course, a lot of calls and phone calls and so on, a lot of meetings, and to get the ship site declared an international grave site from the Canadian government. It's just slightly on Canadian water. That took a lot of effort. In the process, they get to know each other, at these anniversaries, at these ceremonies. And then Heidi said at one point, this is where I get choked up, about 3 years ago when I first met Heidi, she said, the people at this table are not like family. They are family. Said, and she grabs 2 forearms when she said this. She said, who else could know what I've been through other than the people at this table? It's unlike any other experience you could have, basically. So that's how they got that close. And then in the process, she had her daughter Sarah on November 10th, 1998. That is the 23rd anniversary of the shipwreck, in which she lost her grandfather that she never met, obviously. And Sarah joined the Air Force like her mom, Heidi. Oh, I'm sorry. I got that part wrong. That's right. Sorry. There you go. But she's done very well for herself, and these families, by and large, have. And on her 21st birthday, Sarah got a tattoo on her forearm, and you mentioned the final communication goes between Bernie Cooper of the Anderson and following the Edmund Fitzgerald, and of course McSorley, the captain of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And by now he's actually admitting this problem to McSorley is to Bernie Cooper. These guys are like airline pilots. They don't admit anything to anybody. Ladies and gentlemen, be a little turbulence. That's what these guys' mindset are like. And it's competition also. I don't want to tell you the problems I'm having. So he was actually pretty forthright about the starboard list, the fence being down, vent covers being blown off by the waves and so on. And at one point, Bernie Cooper asked him around 7 o'clock, how are you making out with your problems? And McSorley says, we are holding our own. And then Heidi asked her daughter Sarah at the table 3 years ago, Sarah, show John your tattoo. And Sarah pulls up the left sleeve on her hoodie, and on her left forearm, with carefully tattooed letters, is, we are holding our own. And so they are. Time. And by the way, while we're looking for another question, Schuler Books is out in the lobby, and I don't get a dime of that, I swear to God. But they're nice enough to come on down for that. Get them while you can. I will not be here tomorrow. A book is a book, but a signed book becomes a gift, obviously. People are always very apologetic about, they got 3 or 4 books. Geez, do you mind signing my books? I say, geez, do you mind buying them? So if you buy my books, I'll sign them. Writing books really is very hard. Signing them is really easy, it turns out. I'd be happy to do so. So don't feel bad about that. What do we have up there? Yes, sir.
John, book is amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
2 questions. Jen Juline says hi, too.
Yes.
One, have you been approached about the film rights? And then 2, just the way you have told the story like never before about the personal impact and the families, et cetera. I wonder if you've been intrigued enough with this to maybe tell the story about the wreck of the Bradley and its impact on the people of Rogers City.
Sure. Well, thank you very much. A few things to take on there. First of all, to work backwards, the Bradley, I've got a chapter on that in the book. It went down in 1958, and 2/3 of the crew was from one city, Rogers City, and you can imagine the impact on a small town like that. So that is a chapter in the book. That could be a book, no doubt about it, and some have written it. That had a survivor who wrote his own book, which is quite good. That's our material there. And likewise, the Morel had one survivor in 1966. So that's a possibility there. I'm represented by William Morris in New York and LA, so regarding getting some attention from Hollywood, nothing solid yet. But I'll say this, and Heidi's here, I already know if that ends up being offered, it'll be a very long conversation because my greatest concern is the families involved. What drove me to write this book was not the whodunit of what happened, although it's certainly part of the book, and I get into that as well, as we talked about. It's the 29 people. It's the families I met since, the 6 crewmen who were on the ship before it went down. I found one guy, another Academy graduate, probably the last surviving member of the Anderson crew who was on the ship that night. It's as close as we can get to what it was like on the ship that night. So this is all, that's the untold story part, basically. So the last thing I want is to take the hard work I've done in this book. I think I was pretty careful with the families, very careful, in fact, and screw that up with a Hollywood thing that does not tell the story correctly. I'd rather not do it than do that. Furthermore, as far as the talk goes, one of my mentors is Jim Bernstein, he did Mighty Ducks, he did Renaissance Man. He's a U of M guy. He and I are turning Let Them Lead into a screenplay for Disney Plus right now, so that's going pretty well. Great line. He said, in Hollywood, Jim and I, he's from London, Ohio, I'm from Ann Arbor. If Jim and I say, let's do lunch, there's food, okay? Food follows, or actually lunch follows. If Tim Williams says, let's do lunch, there is food. In Hollywood, it's just punctuation. It's just how you say goodbye, basically. And then the corn-fed dude calls you up a month later and said, hey, I'm in town, let's do lunch. Oh, well, this is awkward. You thought I meant that. You corn-fed rube. I mean, that's what you are at that point. So, as he said, in Hollywood, if they say they liked it, they hated it. If they say they loved it, they liked it. If they actually paid you, they loved it. And there's no love in Hollywood until the check clears. So we're getting a lot of talk right now, but it's only talk until someone gets serious about it.
So, John, David is over your left shoulder, David Hooker, and he has some things to say. So I just want to thank everyone for coming, honoring our president and his 50th anniversary, John Bacon, who's a treasurer here in the state of Michigan, and as you know, now with this story and Heidi, the chronicling of what these people went through. There's a great story we didn't get to tonight that one of the girls.
Let's tell it.
Let's tell it. You got it. This really touched me, and I told my wife about it.
So, for all the loss, and the loss was unimaginable, obviously, and Heidi and others have told me, you don't get over this, you get used to it. You never get over it. She's a 12-year-old girl when it happens. You still miss your father 50 years later. You can't not miss your father 50 years later. He is a very sweet man by all accounts. But one ray of hope in this, Cindy Reynolds is a waitress in Toledo during this time. She meets Bruce Hudson, the 20-year-old deckhand, who was an Ohio State student but getting good money for a few summers doing this. He's the only child of Ruth Hudson I mentioned earlier. He's got one weakness, and that's his hot rod car, a 72 Dodge Challenger. Sorry, Jim. And we found the car. The car is in immaculate shape. He's got the sticker of the ship in the back window. He loved the ship, of course. And he and his buddy Mark Thomas, also from Cleveland, are going to go from a cross-country road trip. As soon as they finish, they're going to go to Colorado to get Coors beer, which back then was exotic, I swear to God. And then L.A., and then come back. And then his girlfriend calls him up when he's at the Silver Bay Municipal Bar. On the payphone, that's all you had back then, no cell phones and so on. She calls him up and said, I've got a surprise. And he has to guess what it is, and in fact, she's pregnant. And he's got to think fast. He says, don't worry about it. We'll move in together. We'll raise the child ourselves. We'll be okay. I've got good money. We'll be fine. And she's obviously relieved by hearing that. And then she says, you know what? Go on that trip anyway because it's only going to be a month. The child's not due till June. You guys earned it. So pretty cool on that front, too. Of course, the ship goes down. And Ruth Hudson, she's lost, the person she obviously loved the most. There's no question about that. 6 months later, she finds out she's going to be a grandmother. And she has no idea to that point. So you've lost your son, and now you're going to gain a granddaughter. And the granddaughter is Heather, and she gets Heather shopping, and the mom hates shopping, so the grandmother and the granddaughter go shopping all the time. They're very close. And then Heather has 4 children. The oldest is Austin, and Austin looks just like Bruce Hudson, the child that Ruth had lost. And Ruth told some friends of mine, I never met Ruth. She died in 2015. She told some friends of hers, I love all my grandchildren, but yes, I have a favorite. And I think I get choked up there again. You can think she certainly earned it. So
that was pretty
it's a story I have to get to.
Yeah. Thank you, John. Thank you. Thank you, John.
I'm David Hooker. Gleaves asked me to close our program tonight. I got 4 thank yous, 4 important thank yous. First of all of you for being here tonight. On behalf of the Ford Foundation, really, really appreciate it. To those of you who are members of the Friends of Ford, thank you. That's one of the things that sustains programming like this. So if you're not a member of Friends of Ford, we look forward to you joining the club. Gleaves, thank you for your great leadership. Jim mentioned it earlier. The programming all year long is just fantastic, and you have so much to do with that. Thank you so much. Jim, yeah, please. Jim's a great leader in many different industries, a great friend of the Ford Foundation. And Jim, one of the things I appreciate of your leadership all these years is the way you take the time to lift up people from all walks of life during your leadership. Thank you for that. Yeah. John, you're absolutely amazing. When I was a young boy, a great teacher of mine in elementary school said, David, remember books. Books are, a good friend is a good book is a good friend. I have 14 friends on my shelf thanks to you. John, we thank you for the joy that you bring to all the people that read your books, the joy you bring to this world, and we thank you so very, very much for being here tonight. Ladies. With that, we're adjourned from here. Thank you all.